Boys, we have some gameplay here of PvP in Shadowkeep Sandbox. Now, I try to use a lot of different things, and this is somewhat going to be a review of the exotic hand cannon, but at the same time, we're going to be talking about the sandbox that you're going to be experiencing on October 1st next week. Now, there's a lot of different weapons I wanted to try. We dabbled a little bit with some Einstein D. I used a terribly rolled trackless waste, a Horus Lease, which we know is going to get a substantial buff, putting it pretty much in line with something like Clever Dragon, and of course, the exotic hand cannon Eriana's Vow. Now, what happened was in the first game, they were like, hey, just, use whatever you have on your character. And so I was trying out like Horus Lease, which this is actually a max row Horus Lease in terms of range. It also comes with rangefinder, ricochet rounds, but of course ricochet rounds is receiving a nerf, or at least being dialed back to what Bungie thinks it should be inside of Shadowkeep. You'll notice some severe damage fall off affecting this weapon, but I do want to mention that the weapon still remained pretty consistent, but within its attendant ranges, yes, it is quite nasty. 24 per crit and 15 per body, essentially allowing this pulse rifle to reach an optimal TTK value of 0.8 seconds at 7 crits and 2 body, which is a lot more forgiving than where it is right now, which is 9 crits. Now, was this pulse rifle approaching like Clever Dragon levels of lethality? Well, it felt great, guys. And by the way, this is like me playing on like 3000 DPI or something crazy like that. Like, we weren't really allowed to go into any software and change our DPI, which kind of resulted in things to be a little too jerky for me. Like, I normally play on pretty low DPI. Like, I like to stay around like 800, 900 at most. But despite that, Horus Lease was still landing some crazy shots. And of course, this is rangefinder with moving target and ricochet rounds. I mean, those things together makes for a very lethal roll on something like Horus Lease. Are these rapid fire pulse rifles going to replace our other pulse rifles in the current meta? Things like Blast Furnace, Bygones. I think it is likely that these pulse rifles will get more use, but remember, especially when comparing it to something like Blast Furnace that are aggressive pulse rifles, by default, those pulse rifles have a 0.73 time to kill value at 6 crit and 2 body. The only reason why you don't see more people using them, they're a little harder to control with controller, which is why on console you see more Bygones. Horus Lease and other rapid fire pulse rifles are going to honestly be some of the best weapons for dueling, but when it comes to laning, I think I would still either take Blast Furnace in that aggressive frame category, or maybe even just outright a high impact weapon. Unfortunately, I did not have Redrix on this character, as I would have loved to have seen that weapon in action in this next sandbox, as high impact pulse rifles are getting a buff. Now, also in this gameplay, I'm trying to use bottom tree Sentinel, as the melee there, which is that shield bash, can actually suppress supers. Unfortunately, everyone that I was going against that was using a super was using like a shutdown super. So I'm very sorry. I wish I could have got it off to actually see the suppression at work. We'll just have to wait until the sandbox releases next week to see it in action. Now, the next set of gameplay was actually when Bungie was like, hey, y'all want to play with something nasty? We've got an exotic sniper here in hand cannon form called Eriana's Vow. Oh, baby, was I excited. Now, this weapon came with the intrinsic perk called Looks Can Kill. It states that this weapon fires special shield-piercing ammunition, and it comes with a scope. The weapon also comes with extended barrel, accurized rounds, and the trait there, Death at First Glance. Bonus damage when aiming down sights on the opening shot of an attack. This bonus is preserved if the shot deals precision damage or strikes an elemental shield. Now, as you can see there from the stats, man, impact is maxed out, range also maxed out, but the rounds per minute there is 90 rounds per minute, which is extremely slow for a hand cannon. Matter of fact, the moment you shoot this thing, you realize you can't really treat it like a hand cannon, which was throwing me off terribly. But inside of Crucible, this weapon hits a crit for 164. Another question that came up for many of us was whether or not this hand cannon was going to one-shot people if it was a crit shot, similar to our other snipers. But no, 164 per crit and 103 per body, meaning you can actually kill a Guardian in 2 body shots, even max resilience ones. Now, I wanted to see if it was possible to one crit Guardians inside of Crucible. I tried so hard to get Weapons of Light to proc and get a crit off on an opponent. Unfortunately, I got Nova'd out of my bubble, so I had to give up on that. Now, I believe Datto did kill somebody in one shot with a crit shot with Weapons of Light. And by the way, if Datto says he's just a PvE player only, he is a liar. That man is an absolute sweat, dude. But yeah, he actually landed the crit with Weapons of Light, which is like a 35% buff, which I believe should have hit 221. Now, our third match here, I tried so hard to proc it with Inertia Override, to see if that was actually going to give me the one-shot crit. I actually did proc it, but the only guy I could find to actually shoot was a guy in his super, which actually did hit for 97 damage, so that's actually pretty nice. But if my math is correct, we should be able to one-shot opponents with something like Eriana's Vow and Inertia Override, which opens up some playmaking potential. Now, the damage values that we gave are damage values for the weapon when taking advantage of that trait, Death at First Glance. Without that trait being activated though, say for instance you miss your first shot or you shoot from the hip, our body shot damage, at least what I have here in one of my clips, drops to 78. Unfortunately, I don't have gameplay of the crit value to see how much it drops without that trait being activated, but if the math is consistent, it should be 139, but again, I could be off. This is purely based on the body shot decrease that we receive without that trait being active. Now, that trait is very good, especially in something like PvE, where you've got high health targets and you can sit there and consistently keep popping crit shot after crit shot, essentially allowing you to have a 32% buff there at all times, at least until you stop aiming down sights, or of course miss a precision shot. But now that we know that this hand cannon is more comparable to a sniper than it is a hand cannon in terms of the fact that it's a special weapon, how does it compare damage versus damage? Well, luckily for me, I was foolish enough to pair a sniper with Eriana's Vow. Don't worry guys, I'm not some genius. This was not intentional. I just saw a hand cannon and I literally paired it with the sniper because that's normally what we always do, but this honestly resulted in me being starved for ammo. The damage difference though between this sniper, which is called Tranquility, which is a 90 round per minute sniper, which is the same rounds per minute as Eriana's Vow, was actually crazy. Tranquility here was actually doing 25% more crit damage than Eriana's Vow, and that is with Death at First Glance, and 65.7% more damage than Eriana's Vow without Death at First Glance. Now granted, this sniper that we're comparing Eriana's Vow to is located in the kinetic slot, which kinetic weapons do more damage than energy weapons, but just off of a damage comparison, I would not choose this hand cannon. No, where this hand cannon truly thrives is actually damage against these barrier enemies. So you notice that this guy popped his barrier, which normally makes him immune, unless of course we had a weapon with an anti-barrier mod on it. But that's the biggest benefit about Eriana's Vow, is that it can actually bypass these barriers and still hurt these champions. Hence why the icon of the weapon right next to this elemental type shows that triangle. That's the same triangle that is found on our barrier mods. So yeah, you don't get the most damage with Eriana's Vow, but you get the ability to bypass those annoying barriers. Now, another real big downside of Eriana's Vow is that recoil. My god, a lot of hand cannons in this game have recoil that probably doesn't fit the description of being called a hand cannon. Eriana's Vow fits that description. It is literally a cannon. So mastering this thing and controlling that recoil, especially if you're planning on maining it, won't be an easy thing to do, especially for my guys that are going to try to stack it with things like Inertia Override or Weapons of Light or pretty much anything that increases weapon damage. I don't really know where this hand cannon is going to sit, as I only got to play with it for a couple games. And again, both of those games I was playing with it was on settings that I normally never played Destiny on. Like, I felt like it probably would have been easier for me to hit crits had I been more comfortable with the DPI settings I was on, which is why I don't believe this review will be our final review for this hand cannon. I really want to try this thing out on my home setup, as well as try it out with the controller, because the recoil already looks pretty rough for mouse and keyboard users. I'm curious to know how controller users can handle it. Another side note about Eriana's Vow, this weapon, at least on the Titan class, has very poor in-air accuracy. There was so many times I tried to pop shots off while in the air and it just outright missed. So this is not a hand cannon that I think you would run around with like a normal hand cannon, which is why it was so difficult to find weapons to pair it with. The final weapon I actually paired it with was with the SMG Trackless Waste. Now, considering how slow the handling of this hand cannon is, I would highly advise some dexterity perks, a kinetic weapon with quick draw, something there, guys, because my lord, is it slow. Like, I know it's got polymer grip, but that handling speed is slow as hell. So there you have it, guys. Eriana's Vow, the first of its kind, a 90 round per minute hand cannon that consumes special ammo. It has some playmaking potential, especially when combined with our damage dealing perks, and the upside is that it does hold 4 rounds inside of Crucible. To me, it seems more gauged to being a team shot weapon. I like how Datto compared it to a bow, and it very much is like that, as really a follow-up shot with this hand cannon, considering the recoil, is extremely extremely difficult. You almost want to just get a single shot off and either swap to another weapon immediately or have a teammate clean up whatever it is you hit. But having the ability to instantly knock off 164 health on a Guardian is extremely beneficial in team engagements. Outside of that, guys, that pretty much concludes our video. PvP overall is being shaken up next season. High impact pulse rifles are going to be doing a little more damage. Rapid fire pulse rifles are definitely approaching Clever Dragon levels. So if you got a God Roll Claws or Horror's Lease or even something like Outlast, those should be really good. As far as subclass changes, unfortunately, we don't really have much gameplay to showcase that. But as soon as the next season starts, we'll be reviewing all of these things individually with a lot more depth, including this hand cannon right here, because again, this review does not satisfy me. I need to play a little more with it. 2 games is just not enough to really get an understanding of a weapon. So again, be looking out for a full review on this one next week. Now, before I let you go, Eriana's Vow, you receive this weapon through the season pass. I think free-to-play players with New Light can actually receive it at rank 35. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then players that own the season pass, which I think is pretty much anyone that owns Shadowkeep, collects it, I think, at the first rank up. So it'll probably be one of the first weapons you'll be playing with in terms of like new weapons inside of Shadowkeep. Well, guys, that pretty much wraps it up. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.